Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Monday afternoon debrief with myself, Liam Bryce, joined again by Patrick McPartlin to look back over Hibs' disappointing season all round, discuss last night's Player of the Year awards and the ongoing search for a new manager. Patrick, we were discussing before the show there that there's elements of this season that you can scarcely almost believe actually happened this season, that they feel so long ago. So, I mean, I'm not going to. I'll ask you to cast your mind back a fair distance back to what we were saying. You know that it feels really odd that Lee Johnson being the Hibs manager was still this season. So long ago now, was it? I was sure that was only 8 months ago. So before we dive into all that, folks, let me just pass on a wee word for our sponsors. It's Weissman, a global leader in the boiler industry, known for their top-notch German engineering, and we are thrilled to have them on board, and they've teamed up with Scotland's very own award-winning installation team, MPH Boilers, making it a perfect match right here in Scotland. Weissman's boilers are designed to deliver unparalleled efficiency. Because it's, oh God, I've lost my place there. Give me a moment, folks. Where are we? Yeah. Engineered to deliver not just warmth, but unparalleled efficiency and reliability. We're talking about cutting-edge technology that's designed to save you on your energy bills and reduce your emissions as well. With MPH Boilers, you know you're getting service from the best in the business, a local team that's committed to excellence and customer satisfaction. As part of this incredible partnership, when you choose a Weissman boiler installed by MPH Boilers, you also get a free internet controller, making it a breeze to manage your heating anytime, anywhere. Plus, they're offering you the first year service free. It's all about giving you peace of mind and making sure that you're looked after. So if your boiler's showing its age or you're just considering an upgrade, this is your chance to get world-class engineering with local expert service. Weissman and MPH Boilers, it's a match made in Scotland. Make sure to check them out and take your first step to a warmer, more efficient home. You'd think I'd know that off by heart by now, but apparently not.
I'm disappointed you don't.
I know. I'll need to get back in front of the mirror and practice it a few more 100 times for the next time we come on. Yeah, as I was saying at the top of the show, we're going to take a look back over the season. Discussed last night's Player of the Year awards and obviously the big issue of the moment, which is the search for a new manager. But we'll go about just picking the bones of the season first of all, Patrick. As I was saying, it feels like a long time ago that Lee Johnson was the Hibs manager, but that is where Hibs started this season. So yeah, if we take it back to the beginning, I mean, the kind of first games that I covered this season, I think it was the Luzerne game at home, which I think, unfortunately for a lot of people, is perhaps where this season peaked, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. You look back to, I think, the performance and the result, not just in the first leg, but I think over the sort of two legs of the tie, that's probably about as good as it got. I mean, you know, there were moments, I think probably getting to Hampden in the semi-finals of the League Cup was probably up there, although obviously what transpired at the National Stadium wasn't great. But I think just, you know, the Luzerne game was probably the first and maybe even the last time this season that, you know, fans sort of really enjoyed what they were seeing. There was a bit of sort of positive chaos about the team. There was goals. There was, you know, attacking football. There wasn't like a lot to kind of grumble about. You know, two good results against a decent side from from Switzerland in European competition, and you know, from then on it just sort of fell down a little bit. You know, I think we've said that when you look at Nick Montgomery's tenure, there isn't really anything, unfortunately for him, that kind of came close to matching that. You know, no statement wins. You know, not even games like the 2-2 Derby draw at Tynecastle back in October. Mm-hmm. You know, that's probably about as close as he came, I think, in terms of, you know, a game that sort of came close to, you know, almost matching sort of supporters' kind of feelings, I guess. But yeah, I think ultimately that's the sort of high point for a lot of people, is sort of this game that came back in August, sort of like 8-9 months ago, which is, I think, you know, like we're laughing a bit here, but I think it does sort of like sum up how the season panned out for Hibs. That it started off with a lot of positivity in the summer. You know, they made sort of like some good signings. Ellie Yuan on a permanent deal. Dylan Levitt comes in. You get Jordan Abita, Adam Lafondra as well. You get a backup goalkeeper. Yeah, I think things looked quite positive. Obviously, the clubs got into Europe, and we won't talk too much about the first leg of the game against Interclub de Scaldes in Andorra. But I think there was a lot of positivity that fans had to begin the season, and I think it just evaporated really, really quite rapidly. And then even when some came back under Nick Montgomery, when initially results were good, that also evaporated pretty quickly. And I think it's I look back at the game yesterday. It wasn't the best game I've seen in a long time. But at the same time, I think so. Yeah, and at the same time, just I suppose just the season in microcosm, really. A well taken goal, lots of attacking football, not really making the most of the chances, and a bit of a kind of circus at the back, leading to a goal for the opposition. It's if ever there was a game, 90 minutes that could sum up the season as a whole, I think that was it yesterday in West Lothian.
Yeah, it was. It kind of had everything in a nutshell that we've seen over the course of this season. So obviously, what kind of did for Lee Johnson at the beginning was the kind of inability to juggle those European responsibilities with the sort of bread and butter domestic stuff, and it just kind of underlines how much of a learning curve that can be for teams who aren't perhaps used to playing in Europe. I think it gets kind of spoken about a lot, and it'd be easy to think that it's sort of it's sort of overhyped in terms of the challenges of juggling that, but it's not an easy ask, is it? As Hibs and ultimately Johnson found out to his real cost back then.
Yeah, I mean, if you're competing in Europe, then you need to have a squad capable of dealing with all the rigours of continental football, but you also need to have, the ability to go from sort of Thursday games into Sunday games and just keep things ticking over. And, Hibs obviously had that in Europe. They didn't have it on the domestic front. I think it became a bit of a sort of strange pattern where, they play really well on the Thursday night and then, not very well at the weekend, and then go back to play really well on the Thursday, and then there'd be a result of the weekend that was forgettable. And I think it was, you can call it recruitment, you can call it planning. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure Hibs sort of like were set up really to deal with the sort of rigors of playing Thursday, Sunday for, however long it was going to be. And obviously, they wanted to reach the group stages. Drawing Aston Villa in the playoff round probably wasn't what they wanted, but they would have known, like, from the goals they would have had when they went into the competition. This is sort of like the minimum of how long we want to be in there, and we need a squad that's capable of kind of dealing with that. And I know, we look at the squad size at the moment, and it's quite eye-opening just how many contracted players there are. But it just felt like between Thursdays and Sundays there weren't enough sort of like real quality players who could turn it on a Thursday night and then keep it going on the Sunday, or sort of subbing them out. There were just not really enough kind of, don't want to say it, but talismanic figures. And obviously, I think Martin Boyle just coming back from from a long time on the sidelines. Dylan Venti trying to get up to speed as well. There were other bits and pieces, but it was just, that's kind of really what it did for them, I think, was trying to juggle Europe and domestic football and not quite getting the balance right. And you can look at the results in Europe, you can say, well, they beat Interclub at Easter Road convincingly, they beat Luzerne at Easter Road, they drew away with them in Switzerland. But it was, I think when you've got a game like that, when you've got the occasion, when you've got something different from as you say, the bread and butter, I think that does, you've almost got adrenaline, I think, that kind of carries you through it. And I think that the adrenaline of sort of playing a sort of decent level Swiss team on a Thursday night just maybe can't be transferred into playing St Mirren or Livingston at home, or Motherwell away on the weekend. So obviously Hibs are a team that wants to be getting into Europe every season if they can, going deep in the cup competitions, finishing as high up the table as they can. And in order to do that, you need to have a level of continuity. You can't be changing manager every season. You can't be sort of changing 10, 15 players every season. Obviously they don't have Europe to worry about this coming season. But it's still, you've got the League Cup, and it's obviously not the same level as Europe. But again, it's something you have to be prepared for. It's something you have to not underestimate, as we saw Lee Johnson do in his first season in charge. It can't really be treated as glorified pre-season friendlies. You have to take it seriously. Because every summer you look at the League Cup group stages and there are just some absolutely bonkers results.
Yep.
And I think, obviously that's something that Hibs will want to avoid. And whoever the manager is, you would hope that he's had enough time to get some players in and to, maybe get a couple of pre-season friendlies under the belt and just really kind of gear them up for, a good tilt at, a trophy that they have a real chance of progressing into the sort of final four. Otherwise, it's going to be another long season, and I'm not sure there's too many fans who could take much more of that.
No, I really doubt that. Really doubt that there is. Obviously, Lee Johnson leaving then opened the door for Nick Montgomery. We'll not go, too kind of far into the, game by game, or just not to drag out the pain of it for people any more than is necessary. But I mean, he came in, Nick Montgomery. There was. I'd say if not universal approval, but at least I think there was kind of quite widespread consensus that it was quite an interesting appointment, a promising one. It was a kind of a coach on a genuinely upward trajectory, a young coach. He'd already been kind of tipped for bigger things. He'd worked wonders in Australia, and it started well enough, didn't it? I mean, I think he only lost 2 of his first 13 games, Nick Montgomery, and both of them were against Celtic and Rangers. Granted, there was a lot of draws in there, but I do remember the feeling of sort of cautious optimism up until, we'll talk about where it started to turn. But I think there was a fair amount of cautious optimism in those first kind of stages. You do wonder. I do wonder how different things might have been if Hibs had won that League Cup semi-final, because we've talked so many times about how he just didn't get a statement victory, Nick Montgomery. He didn't get that one game, that one result that just sort of kick-started everything, that could have been the sort of result that things can completely flip on, that can change the mindset of a team. Once you get to a final, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, it was... That the more I think about it, that was the game that kind of sticks out for me. And there was quite a few what-if moments in Montgomery's tenure, but I think looking back on that, if they'd got over the line in that semi-final, and it's pure speculation, but you do wonder what that would have did for the mentality of a team who did struggle with that side of the game for much of the season, because it ended up being, it wasn't so pronounced at that point, but the way they lost that game ended up, it was almost like a kind of precursor to a lot of things that we saw that came after, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. We talk about sliding doors moments in seasons, and I think Hibs had a fair few of them. To go back to what you're saying about Nick Montgomery's appointment, I think you're right. I think there was, if not a kind of universal approval, certainly a sort of interest to see how he would fare, because I think if you look back at Hibs' recent history, probably 2 of the most successful managers, and certainly 2 of the most kind of universally liked managers in Alan Stubbs and Tony Mowbray, hadn't had sort of like a storied past in management when they came in. Mowbray obviously a very sort of unexpected left field choice back in the early 2000s, and then I think Stubbs probably coming in after coaching, I think it was Everton under 18s. Risky appointments that kind of worked out well, and I think certainly for Alan Stubbs you had that team, you had John Doolan and Andy Holden alongside him, and I think collectively that was just a really good fit. So I think when the club sort of headhunted Montgomery, and obviously he'd worked wonders with Central Coast Mariners in terms of the budget they had relative to the other teams in the A-League, and the man management obviously a really big part of of the success. And I think, when you looked at other elements of it, you looked at, I think, Sergio Raimundo's background, you look at Miguel Miranda's background, and, the keepers he'd worked with, you thought this looks like it could potentially be, a really good fit. And, I think it was admirable to begin with that there was this desire to sort of focus on an identity, because that's something that Hibs had been lacking. You didn't know what Hibs were for. You didn't know what, were they going to play 3-5-2? Were they going to play 4-3-3? Were they going to play 4-2-3-1? Were they going to go long? And, I think there was, that made sense to sort of try and get some sort of identity in place. And as you say, I think it started off quite well. Any sort of hiccups, I suppose, you're saying, well, he is just in the door. He's not had a transfer window to get his own players in. He's had injuries to deal with. I think refereeing decisions in VAR as well, probably played a part. But at the same time, I just think, either, I don't know whether it was underestimating the league. I don't know whether it was kind of staying true to his beliefs to a fault, or whether it was a combination of lots of factors. But, I don't think it was merely a case of, Montgomery making the wrong decisions. There were obviously other elements contributing to it, but I don't think he helped himself when I think most people could see that the 4-4-2 wasn't really working. And, he had the players to move to 4-2-3-1. It's what they were used to. And, I just sort of think if they'd moved to that a bit earlier, could that have also, made a difference? We can, as you say, we can talk about a lot of what ifs. The League Cup semi-final, obviously really disappointing to be, to have a man advantage and to lose in the manner they did, really, really demoralising. And then, a few days later, they go away to St Mirren, and I think I got that right. I couldn't think I've got the right order. Losing a late goal there as well, and that it sort of felt a bit like a double whammy. And I'm not entirely sure they ever really recovered from it. When you look at how bad the run of form was in December going into January, and then there was that little uptick, after the new signings started to click. But that sort of faded away as well, and it was sort of short-lived. And I think, you went from, there was a time when you thought, Hibs are probably good for the top six, to then thinking, actually, they might not be. And, that's ultimately what happens. And I think in terms of who gets the job next, you look at what Hibs have tried in recent seasons. They've tried, well-respected coach who doesn't really have a management background, but, putting someone alongside him, or he brings somebody in alongside him who does have management experience, Sean Maloney, and you think, if it works, brilliant. If it doesn't, then, it's a bad one. And again, there were factors that affected him, losing Nisbet to injury, losing Martin Boyle to Al Fazali didn't help. After him, there's then this move to appointing somebody who's, got bags of experience in, managing in English football, and, you'd have to say knows a bit about Scottish football from their playing career, Lee Johnson. And, there were elements of that worked. I think it's fair to say, he finished in the top six, got them into Europe. They'd obviously had that sort of blip, if you like, and he sort of went on the warpath in January and talked about shipping out 10 players. And, I think it actually ended up getting rid of 10 players in that window, so staying true to his word. But then, you look at on the financial side of it, Hibs kind of blow the budget to back him so they can get Europe. And, the sort of the positives from achieving the goals, but then the cup performances weren't great. And, 3 games into the new season, he's gone. And, they sort of headhunt somebody who's had success in, another country, in another league, with a club, I wouldn't say similar to Hibs for a variety of reasons, but that sort of not having the same budget as the big boys in the league, you can make that comparison with Hibs and like Celtic Rangers. And, they've tried that. So I think the concern now in terms of who they go for is they're kind of running out of options of what they do, because they've tried a lot of types of manager and none of them have really worked fully. And, I think that has to be one of the main kind of, that has to be one of the main kind of focus points of the search, is finding somebody who can take the good bits of the previous managers and kind of tie it all together.
Yeah, well, just on the subject, managers, Gary Pastor comment on Facebook, McInnes must be offered the job. We need stability, and Delt knows the SPFL inside out. Check out his interview with Simon Ferry on Open Goal earlier this season. So I'm assuming that's when the one manager, they do the manager of the month interviews, don't they? So Yeah, I mean, McInnes he's a name that's it's kind of obvious kind of end to arrive at McInnes if you're thinking like, okay, Hibs do they need a manager who's sort of tried and trusted, who's a proven track record of success in the SPFL. He did it for years with Aberdeen. I think we maybe touched about briefly in the last video, just said maybe it kind of possibly stayed there a wee bit too long, but he's gone to Kilmarnock, taking a bit of a risk, probably, Derek McInnes, and dropping down to the Championship, a notoriously difficult league to get out of, because he sort of needed a win, I think, really, at that point, Derek McInnes, didn't he? And it's as I say, you are taking your chances if you drop down to the Championship. He backed himself to get Kilmarnock out of there. He had a sort of transitional season in the Premiership last season, and now this season he's got him into Europe. So I mean, you can certainly understand the sort of groundswell of support for somebody like Derek McInnes. He is probably as close to that sort of guarantee of winning now, as far as as can be reasonably expected in the Premiership. So again, can understand the sort of groundswell of support there. I think what some people have maybe raised as, would he be interested in the job at this moment in time? I think he does have a bit of a reputation as a manager who likes to have control. Obviously, with the structure that's in place at Hibs, he'd be working under Malky Mackay. Obviously, as part of his appointment as part of the ongoing review into the football operation. So it is. So where do you stand on Derek McInnes, Patrick? Is basically what I'm trying to get around to, because as I said, you can see why it's an attractive option. It's just whether he want to work at that structure that Hibs have in place just now. Does he, would he look at it and think, I've got a really good thing going on here at Kilmarnock, we're going into Europe, why should I take a chance at a club that just keep firing managers left, right and centre? So it's, where do you stand?
You could say that about a lot of potential managers. I think, yeah. I mean, Nick Montgomery referenced this when he got the Hibs job, and he said, you look at the recent history and it is a concern that there have been so many comings and goings on the managerial front. And I do think, there are probably some managers who would look at the job and say, regardless of what Hibs has been like as a club over the past few years in terms of performances, off-field managerial merry-go-rounds, hundreds of players coming in and out, I think it's still an attractive job. It's still you've got everything in place. That you've got a really good training centre, you've got a really good stadium, you've got the facilities, and I just think that it's kind of all set up for somebody to come in. There's not an awful lot to do, relatively speaking, to sort of like come in and just, I suppose, try and take the club to where the hierarchy want them to be, where the fans want them to be, where the players want to be in terms of having the chance of winning trophies. But yeah, I think you touched on it there. It's there are some people like why would you want to leave a good thing somewhere else for a job that really you probably don't have the same sort of level of security. I mean, you talk about McInnes going down to the Championship, and that's maybe a risk given it's a really competitive league, and we've seen that this season as well. But I think we don't know what assurances he was given by Kilmarnock, but he gets the chance to take them back. The chance to take them back up to the Premiership. He's then given a season to kind of build, and then he gets another season to sort of build on what he's already done. And we sort of see they've performed well this season. They've probably outperformed expectations, I think, probably fair to say. Mm-hmm. And I think, sorry, excuse me. There's a sign I'm talking too much, clearly. But I think, part of the reason why he, I think, appeals to a lot of Hibs fans is that they can see Hibs being a sort of similar club in terms of needing somebody to come in and oversee a sort of big turnaround in, recruitment in everything, really. And he obviously had the chance to do that at Kilmarnock, and they backed him, and the club sort of like reaping the rewards. So I think it's clear to see why why there are a lot of people who think he'd be a good fit. I think he obviously has I think you probably know Malky Mackay really well, and I think that's probably also sparked, people saying, "Oh, will he be a good fit?" But I'm not sure whether, as you say, would he want to work in the structure? I'm not sure if you've got somebody with Malcolm Mackay's experience of the game in Scotland and further afield. Do you need somebody like Derek McInnes in there, or is it going to be a little bit too? Are you going to have sort of like two big beasts, if you like, sort of challenging each other for decisions on recruitment, decisions on whatever. So that's the sort of one. I think that's the one bit where it doesn't really add up for me. And I think as well at Aberdeen, possibly when I don't know if this is one of those things that's almost become like an internet fact, but I do think that McInnes things seemed to get a bit sort of strained at Aberdeen when I think Dave Cormack was getting more involved. And I know it's different. I know it's not the same. I know it's not the same position and everything, but I just wonder whether that's a little bit of a clue into how McInnes likes to do things. But it does make sense. I think it's similar with recruitment. You look back to when Hibs brought in Jack Ross. Obviously, he was doing well at another Scottish team. They bring him in, and as part of the recruitment and as part of the sort of club structure back then, they were looking at young Scottish players from other teams that they could bring in, build up, and then kind of move on, for a profit, helping the player to, further their career and also getting the best of them. And Hibs don't seem to be doing that, on either front now. I mean, they obviously do seem to be going back to it with, the appointment of this sporting director role and bringing in Malcolm Mackay, who knows the league as a manager, who knows Scottish football. And it's like I said, I've said in previous videos that Hibs do seem to be going back to the structure that they had in place previously, which was working quite well.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's probably the way to go because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think, this trying to create this development squad idea and, bringing in these sort of players from overseas or, up and coming players from other teams. It's just, you need kind of proven quality as well as, maybe one or two untapped gems in this league. And I think that, when you consider all of that, then it's sort of blatantly obvious, and obviously the performance of the last sort of 2 or 3 managers, why the bulk of Hibs fans just want somebody in who knows the league, who knows Scottish football, who has experience of kind of doing well in it. But I just, my overriding feeling is that if you've got somebody like Malcolm Mackay in that position of being sporting director, I think that, and as well, it does, we're pretty sure, if not very sure, that it's going to be a head coach position rather than a manager position, which again goes back to the model they had when Stubbs was in place. The idea being that, if the head coach moved on, then everybody else's position stayed the same, in terms of, the backroom staff. And then, there was sort of limiting the amount of change and the amount of upheaval that you had. And we've obviously seen the other side of that when, managers are going and they're taking their sort of 2 or 3 strong backroom staff with them, and then you start from scratch. So, for me, McInnes doesn't fit that kind of head coach model.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could be that Hibs are kind of hedging their bets by bringing in Mackay and sort of thinking, well, this means that whoever we feel is the best fit, whether they're experienced or inexperienced, we've got a kind of structure in place that allows them to, operate the same. But it just, to me, having somebody with Mackay's experience in there, to me, sort of suggests that the Hibs won't go down the route of, appointing a kind of tried and tested, experienced Scottish manager because, it's more of a head coach role. Mm-hmm. So, like I say, I see the arguments for it. I just, I could well be wrong, but to me, it feels like they're going to go down a slightly different route than, just sort of bringing in kind of tried and tested, if you like.
Yeah, exactly. Because I suppose what is going to be a big sort of facet of Malcolm Mackay's role is just ensuring like continuity. When a manager leaves, then it's not a complete rip it up and start again job. It'll be sort of you think that what part of his role is going to be sort of looking, if he's going to be overseeing the entire football operation, it will be, okay, this is the way that we want a Hibs team to play. We're going to look for coaches who we feel can deliver that. We'll recruit players to fit that model, and then managers always leave one way or another. They do well in Scotland, they'll get headhunted for somewhere else. You don't do well, you get sacked. They leave one way or another. Very few, really. I mean, you just got to look at the amount of turnover in the Premiership now. Like, it's very few stay for an awful long time. So, yeah, I'd be. So, as much as I think I can understand why a lot of people would like to see Derek McInnes, I'm just not sure if it fits the road that Hibs seem to be going down. So I suppose then, and we did discuss this briefly on last week's marathon video. The man who is currently sitting in the dugout, could it be time for David Gray? I mean, if you're talking about that structure and a head coach to work under an experienced sporting director, Gray is already, in with the bricks at Hibs. He knows the club inside out. He has, the kind of undying love of the supporters. He's worked under several different managers, cutting his teeth. Again, we might, apologies if we are slightly repeating ourselves from last week's video, but we did cut that discussion short for the purposes of a new manager search video. So basically, you can sort of understand the sort of stance that David Gray's been taking over the past week or so. He's not, he's he seems very good at being, diplomatic about these things. He's
we
not.
We call that sitting on the fence. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not. He's not coming out and outright declaring, it's my time. This should be my time. He's got that well-worn line that he's had to wheel out 4 times now. I'm just here to do a job. But he has said, I feel ready for this, or something, words to those effects. What was it? He said, I believe I can do it. That's what he said, wasn't it? So it's, is it? I'll come to you with a kind of maybe a counterpoint to that I've seen a few people raise in terms of David Gray, but there is maybe a sense now more than the other times that he stepped in that this could this potentially be David Gray's time to get a crack at it.
I think there's a lot about it which would make sense. I think when you consider how much upheaval there's going to be this summer, it would be a sense of continuity. It's the big risk of appointing someone who doesn't have an affinity with the club or an kind of background in Scottish football, even with Malcolm Mackay there, is are they going to fully get it? Are they going to fully? And it's the same. It's the same with players. Are they fully going to understand what's required? Are they going to understand how big the club is, and probably like how big a job it is? Because I think it's very easy to sort of come in and think, oh, this is fine. We've got a decent sized budget. We'll this should be sort of fairly straightforward, and then you're kind of left kind of shocked by what it's actually really like. And I think there was probably a time when Gray himself would have said, it's not my time yet, like not for me. And I've seen a lot of people kind of countering the idea of him getting the job by saying, he needs to go somewhere like with League One or maybe even League Two, and kind of cut his teeth there in management and then work his way up. And I'm not sure that's always the case. I don't think you have to do that. Mm-hmm. And it could just be that for whatever reason it just works for him at Hibs, and by that I mean what he's currently doing in terms of being a first team coach, working with the different managers, because that that is like the one bit of continuity from manager to manager is is great. And I think, he said himself that he's obviously taken so much on board from, Jack Ross, Sean Maloney, Lee Johnson, Nick Montgomery. He's obviously got his own ideas. He's seen their mistakes. He's seen what they've done that's good. And, on the occasions he's come in, he's taken the team on an interim basis. I think a pretty decent record overall when you consider when he kind of stepped in after Johnson was relieved of his duties. He led Hibs to a win at POTY, which is a rare occurrence for Hibs in recent history. When he did so again after the Montgomery win, it's a first win of the season against a Motherwell team in really good form, with probably the one of the league's in-form strikers in Theo Bair. And, you know, he was saying it was just about the basics. You know, it's like after you get beaten 4-0 by Aberdeen at Easter Road, just, you know, the one thing is make yourselves harder to beat, do the basics properly. And, you know, I think, you know, here's someone who has played for the club, who knows the league, knows the Scottish game, has spent plenty of time on the coaching circuit with different managers at Hibs. And, you know, I think the important thing as well is, like, you know, you can obviously look back to yesterday's game and say, well, you know, we didn't really do it there. But, you know, I think it's maybe impossible to sort of properly assess it, given it was, like, you know, the end of season, and, you know, you're playing a team that doesn't really have anything to play for. You know, there's some players there who, you know, obviously they're kind of leaving in the summer. You don't really know what's happening. I just sort of think that the way that Gray's been talking recently is different to the way it's been before. I think he feels like, you know, he's ready, and he's not really afraid to kind of put that across. I mean, he's not coming out and saying, give me the job, but he is sort of, I think, making it clear that, you know, he does feel ready for the position. I think he feels that he can do a good job. He also had Martin Boyle talking last week and saying that, you know, all the players respect him, that, you know, they really take on board what he says. And I think you could certainly see that against Motherwell last midweek, that, you know, a lot of players who looked really kind of burnt out and indifferent under Montgomery all of a sudden seem to have this sort of second wind. You know, Martin Boyle obviously scoring twice in that game. And just, you know, some players had a bit more zip about them. And, you know, I know there's nearly always a new manager bounce. But I think it's the fact that, you know, Gray's sort of doing this time and time again, and, you know, seems to be getting something out of the players. So, you know, the club's tried a lot of other options. They've gone down a lot of different routes. You know, but, you know, maybe there is the option that Gray gets at this time. And they just look at it and say, well, you know, the players react well to him. And, you know, with Mackay as a sounding board, possibly an experienced assistant, then you'll be well equipped to kind of take the team forward. And you've got that, you've got that sort of sense of continuity, but somebody who also knows what the club needs in certain positions, and how to get the best out of the players at his disposal, you know, whoever they are. So, you know, I think I can see the argument for bringing somebody in with experience, but Hibs have done that, and it didn't really work. You know, it didn't have the desired effect. Like, yeah, there were good bits, but, you know, it wasn't a perfect fit. And, you know, I think you look at other teams who've appointed sort of managers who have, or head coaches or whatever, who haven't had a vast amount of experience at the top level. You know, Aberdeen and Barry Robson initially. You know, Hearts and Stephen Naismith. Like, there's obviously a kind of warning with Barry Robson that, you know, things did go south. Yeah, POTY very, very quickly. Peter Leven seems to have done a similar thing to what Robson did when he got the job on a kind of temporary basis or an interim basis, where, you know, the team seems to be playing a lot better. The difference being obviously that he's not going to get the job on a full-time basis. So I think it's a really difficult one, because you've obviously got the fact that, you know, Gray has the status among, you know, the Hibs support and this place in history for scoring the goal in 2016 in the cup final. And, you know, I think people are afraid it would be another Sosie situation where, you know, if things didn't go well, then, you know, the club would feel they had to sack him, and then you've sacked like a club legend, and where do you go from there?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, the main thing is really, I mean, it's, you know, worth remembering as well that part of the reason for Mackay being brought in is to sort of help lead this search for the right person to take the team, the right head coach. So, you know, he might feel it makes perfect sense to have somebody who's in with the bricks as the head coach, or he might think we need to go down a different route, but, you know, keep him on for that sort of sense of continuity. I just think it's, you know, I think with Mackay's position, talking about a head coach, Gray would make a lot of sense, and he certainly seems to be speaking like he wants the job, even if he's not actually saying I was going to say issuing a come and get me plea, a sort of like please hold on to me plea, I suppose. But I think.
Can you issue a come and get me plea when you're already in the building? Does that?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It'd be a please keep me here plea.
Yeah,
or something. It doesn't really have the same ring to it. But I think, that would be an appointment not without its risks as well. But, at the end of the day, any appointment is going to have a risk attached to it.
Yeah.
And, I think the bigger picture here is Hibs sort of changing the structure and trying to get something in place, which is less of a, it's not too strong to say circus, because it has been a bit like that recently. It has been a bit all over the place in terms of like, who's doing what and, development teams and, whatever's going on. So I think Hibs are sort of maybe recognizing that, things need to get better off the park. Like obviously like off field is good, but I mean, in terms of having the structure in place, that means whoever comes in has, all the tools necessary to kind of make a decent fist of it. And whether that's David Gray, whether it's somebody else. And I think that's ultimately the sort of main thing here is getting the structure right, so that then whoever comes in doesn't really matter whether they're experienced or not experienced, because the structure just works. So, that's. I can see, like, it's like McInnes. I can see why it would make sense, and I can also see why the club might not want to go down that route. But certainly, Gray is a man who's speaking like he would be very, very keen to get the job on a permanent basis, and whether or not that happens, I think we shall have to see. There's a comment here saying, "What time frame do you think the club are working to get the new man in?" I imagine they would want to do it sooner rather than later. You've got the League Cup starting in a matter of weeks. You've obviously got pre-season, and there's a need to get players into the work with them. So, I know that Malcolm Mackay doesn't really start officially until June the 1st, but you would imagine that there's been work done in the background, with a view to making an appointment as soon as possible. I think it just makes sense to get somebody in and give them as much time as possible with, in the job and with the squad before having to get going again. And I think it's the second week of July for the League Cup group games.
Yeah, it's really not far away at all, is it? It doesn't stop for very long at all these days. So yeah, as you say, time of the essence in terms of getting a new manager in. So just to finish up, Hibs Player of the Year, awards last night. Jordan Abita, the big winner on the night. I don't think anybody could really argue too much with that. He's been a kind of a figure of consistency in a very inconsistent season, hasn't he?
He has, although you're saying I'm not sure anybody could argue with that. I think Mizian Malida might also have something to say about that.
Perhaps, yeah.
I mean, I think it probably makes sense. I mean, say, can your player of the year have only spent half the season at the club? That's the big one. And obviously Nathan Mariah Welch winning the Young Player of the Year award. He's only been in the building for half a season, but perhaps more of a comment on the way the club was in the first half of the season. That a lot of the good bits came in the second half of the season. Mizian hitting, I think, was it 11 goals in all competitions by the end of the campaign. And Elliot, obviously, I think 10 goals, 11 assists. There's not too many players who've hit double figures for both goals and assists for Hibs recently. But I just feel that perhaps there were maybe one or two moments. I think fans sort of like picked him out as being culpable for some of the games where late goals were lost, and I think that maybe coloured some people's opinion in terms of who should get the award. And not to take anything away from Abita, I think he has been really consistent throughout the season. I think at times he's been like probably one of the standout performers when in sort of poor results or poor performances. And I know you can say there shouldn't really be any positives from like poor results, poor performances, but it's also worth remembering that this is the sort of first man in a good long while who has finally managed to dethrone Lewis Stevenson. So I mean that's that in itself is a pretty major achievement, because as we know, Stevenson has seen off a lot of pretenders to that throne. So I think I think probably not too surprising that fans would go for that. Somebody consistent, somebody who's sort of been at the club for the whole season and has made that position their own. I don't think he's really let Hibs down on any occasion. And I think as well, importantly, is his teammates voting for him too, which I think says a lot. I think quite often, you sort of see who the players vote for, and it doesn't always match up with what the fans think. But in this case, obviously, it did. So I think not a great surprise. I think a good bit of business, or one of the good bits of business last summer in the transfer window. I think Hibs fans will be hoping for a few more bits of business like that this summer. But yeah, I think not a huge surprise in the end that he got, not just the fans player of the year award, but also the players award as well.
Yeah, not a huge surprise at all. I think that's us for today. Covered everything, most of the season. As I said earlier on, we didn't want to go into some of the more painful elements in too much depth because we have discussed them to death already. So yeah, we will be back later on in the week. Again, probably to discuss this search for a new manager and how it's progressing, because it is the big issue of the moment. But until then, folks, I thank you for joining us as always. If you're watching on YouTube, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. Help us continue to grow the YouTube channel. It helps us to keep on doing what we're doing in terms of videos. There'll be more follow-up content from Livingston yesterday on the website from 10:30 p.m. So do keep an eye out for that as well. You can get access to all our content on the website via the link below, hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe. Current offer £4 for 4 months.
And what better time to subscribe when there's not a manager in place and there's so many players coming in? Just do my
exactly.
subscriptions here.
There has never been a better time to subscribe to the Hibs Observer.
I think as well, though, it's sorry to interrupt you. I think it probably bears sort of like a bit of chat. Just, people thinking, oh goodness sake, he's still talking. But it's obviously been a really busy season for us in our kind of first few months as a publication, a sort of digital offering. And I think it's been, it'd be remiss of me not to kind of thank everyone who has subscribed and sort of really got on board with what we're doing. I think back September when we first started, and there was that sort of big fear that nobody would subscribe, nobody would get on board with it. And I think, it's certainly not been short of incident this season. There's been plenty to talk about and write about, and I think we've probably learned a lot from what we've been doing.
Absolutely.
I think obviously it's it is the end of the season, but there's still loads to write about, still lots to discuss, and I think just really looking forward to kind of just, I think, keeping things going and kind of building on what we've done over the past sort of 8 or 9 months, and just really looking forward to bringing people more exclusive content, more of the same sort of stuff we've been doing that you're not getting anywhere else. So yeah, if I just thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you for your continued support. Thank you for spreading the word. Please keep on doing that, because there are still people out there who, you mentioned the Hibs Observer, and this sort of look of confusion comes over their face. And yeah, I think it has been a difficult season for Hibs fans. There's not been a lot to cheer about, but I think hopefully this season will be a little bit different, and there'll be a little bit more positivity, and we'll be doing more positive videos. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Aye, absolutely. Yeah, folks, just to echo what Patrick said, thank you for sticking with us, even though there's not been a lot to cheer about on the pitch this season. Hopefully that will change in the not too distant future. But for now, we are going to park it there. We will be back later on in the week. So thank you all for joining us. We do very much appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.